Welcome to the final part of our heritage talk on hidden nature, what's beneath your feet, discovering Museum Sheffield. I believe Martha now is going to join me from the museum.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the next step of the process. So as Natasha and Jenny were saying, and the things from the site eventually end up in the museum. The museum has been going since 1875, so a little bit longer than Wessex Archaeology. So a lot of the things we have are from historic excavations. The main archaeology gallery at Weston Park Museum is called Beneath Your Feet. So I'll forgive Wessex for stealing the title for their webinar, but I suppose we're doing it jointly, so that's okay.
That's where I got the inspiration from.
Yeah, it's a good name. The gallery opened in 2016, and the idea is it's a showcase for all our local archaeology, and we're taking local as quite a large area, because in the past the collecting area of the museum was much wider than it is now. So these days we only collect from within the city boundary of Sheffield and from certain areas of North Derbyshire, but in the past it was a much wider area, into Lincolnshire, up to North Yorkshire. We even have some items in the collection from Kent, but we thought that'd be stretching it to have this as local. So I think the next slide shows you a map of where some of the finds are from. Is that right, Natasha? Or?
Yes, it does. And I also have a video of the gallery to play as well.
Yeah, so so this shows you a map of some of our significant find spots. It's obviously a little bit too small for you to read the key, but this map is on display. It's at the entrance to the gallery and shows you the area. So you'll see on the left hand side that green, well, I always imagine it as a sort of boxing glove shape. That green sort of boxing glove shape is the Peak District National Park. So a lot of the material is from that area. We've even got things from as far south as Derby on display. Creswell Crags material we have, so that's probably the oldest material we have. So the gallery is arranged so that it's chronological. You start on the left hand side with the material from Creswell Crags and from Hilton, around about 50,000 years old, hand axes, and then it works its way around through the Mesolithic, Neolithic, Bronze Age, Iron Age, through the Roman period, the Anglo Saxon period, which is one of, we've got an amazing Anglo Saxon collection, and we'll see some of those items later on, and through into the medieval period, and it ends up roughly around about 1800. So we do have material in the archaeology collection that is newer than 1800, because if you imagine 100 years ago is 1920s, so it doesn't seem that long ago, but actually archaeologically those things can come up out of the ground even from that age. But at the museum we mostly interpret sort of from 1850 onwards in our social history gallery, Sheffield Life and Times. So I think this is probably a good point to show that video that we've got of the gallery if you haven't had a chance to go and see it. Okay, so that gives you a little taster of what it's like. And if you weren't aware, the museum has reopened, so you are able to go and visit it and see it for yourselves. So I'm now going to just talk to you about a few highlights that I picked out, animal-related highlights that are on display in the gallery. So you can maybe when you go and see it, you can see if you can spot these. So these three objects that you can see now are all made of parts of an animal, and they're all from a site called Harborough Rocks, which is in Derbyshire, in the Peak District National Park. On the left-hand side, we've got an awl, which is a sort of tool for making holes, probably in cloth, perhaps in leather. And it doesn't actually look to me too far from the actual part of the animal, the actual bone. They've essentially sharpened the end of it, but the top of it, to me, still looks quite like an animal. In the middle, you have a bone weaving comb. So obviously in the days before plastic, bone was a really commonly used material. It was easily available. You can shape it easily. It's quite light. And unlike plastic, it breaks down pretty well in the soil, but not as well, luckily for archaeologists, not completely. So it does survive quite often. So these are all Iron Age items. So they're about 2,000 years old, a little bit over 2,000. So the weaving comb would have been used obviously when weaving cloth to push the threads into place. And on the left hand side, you've got a bear tooth. And the fact that it's had a hole drilled in the top then suggests it would have been used as a pendant. So that's the other thing that archaeologists do a lot of, is you're finding something that is natural, such as a tooth, an animal tooth, and what makes it archaeological in terms of telling the human story is, has a human modified it and done something with it. Okay, on to a little bit more recent archaeology, although even this is over 1,000 years old. These are some cow rib bones from a site called Wigbelow, which is known as a burial site, again in Derbyshire in the Peak District, both used in the Bronze Age and reused in the Anglo Saxon period. And these three rib bones from a cow were found in a burial of a man and a woman. And these are just three of the rib bones. I think I decided just to display three rather than all of them. And what was interesting about them was, first of all, you only had the rib bones of the cow, so it was just part of the cow placed in the burial. And the way that they were found, which if Natasha shows the next slide, you'll see a plan of the burial. So you can see there's two skeletons in there, and in the top skeleton, it's a little bit tricky to see, but if you look across the thigh of the skeleton, you can see some rectangles, and those rectangles are the rib bones. So they're sort of numbers 4, 4, 2, 7, 8. Yes, exactly there, Natasha. And because of the way they're laid out as they would have been. So the interpretation with this has been that they have put a side of beef in with the burial as some kind of food offering, so they'd have some food to eat in the afterlife. And there were all sorts of other things found in there as well, other objects as well. The big black rectangle in the centre is a sword, and there's spearheads and other items.
So was that common for them to put food offerings in?
I don't know how common. I'm not an expert in Anglo-Saxon burials, but I think it's the only one that we've got where they have found bones. But I guess perhaps if they put other food, that was more like that, because obviously all we've got left of that side of beef are the bones. So if they put something in that wouldn't have such firm remains, maybe it's been missed. And when these were excavated, these sites, I don't think environmental archaeology was as common. So they didn't do all sorts, they didn't do a lot of soil analysis. So again, this is also from Wigbelow. So again, an Anglo-Saxon, from an Anglo-Saxon burial site, that same site. So yes, the beaver was an animal that had symbolism in Anglo-Saxon mythology. So it then makes sense that they've taken a tooth from that animal and they've made it into a pendant by wrapping it in gold, which is obviously a very precious material. So there's been a few of these found. We have one in our collection. There's another one in the British Museum's collections. So moving a bit further up to date, and these are bone, what we call worked bone. So in archaeology, you tend to divide things into the finds into animal bone, and then you look closely and see if some of the pieces have been worked, so humanly modified. So we can tell these are bone, but they're obviously not straight from the animal. Somebody has done something to shape them. And they are probably, certainly some of them are probably pieces, what we call knife scales. So essentially knife handles, bits that would be attached to the metal bits of knife handles to form the handle. And these are from the site of Sheffield Castle. And you can see the one of the ones in the middle has got sort of hatching lines, decorative hatching lines cut into it, and others have been shaped. These are probably maybe from the 1800s, possibly the 1700s, but I would say the 1800s, these ones.
Will these go on display?
These ones are on display. I don't think all 6 of them are, but selection certainly are. It's just I haven't got a very good photo. Okay, so this is the bit where I'm being a little bit self-indulgent, but you know, who doesn't like animals? The next things I'm going to show you are items that we've got on display where they've used animals as a decorative motif. So this is our famous Benty Grange helmet. This is the first Anglo Saxon helmet that was ever found in Britain. And it was found in 1848 by the antiquarian Thomas Bateman, and it has an animal on the top of it, which is a boar, again a symbol of strength in Anglo-Saxon mythology, so it makes sense that a warrior's helmet would feature a boar. And I think the next slide shows you a close-up of it. So you'll be able to see the helmet itself. The framework was made of iron and then probably would have had horn plates in between. And the boar, if you look, as you can see close up, that's made of bronze. It's got little studs in it. And you can see the eye is made, it's got a gold outline and a garnet. So this is not an everyday helmet at all, possibly just used for ceremonial purposes, but really would have been a very rich and high status object when it was used. So, and as well as the British archaeology on display in the gallery, we also have some temporary displays in which gives us an opportunity to bring out some of our non-British archaeology. These 2 objects are from our ancient Cypriot collection, and animals were a regular motif in ancient Cypriot art. On the right-hand side, you can see a jug with a bird painted on it. And on the left-hand side, this is a ritual pouring vessel known as a riton or a riton, and it's hard. The animal is a little bit hard to tell what it might be. Perhaps it's a bull, but I always find it slightly amusing that the pouring spout is essentially near its bottom. But maybe that had symbolism, I don't know, in ancient Cypriot religion. This is what's called a stirrup pot. So the stirrup, there's sort of joining handle between the 2 halves, from Peru, from around about the 1400s. And it's you've got a little man with a hat, and he's got perhaps a sheep, or is it a donkey, carrying it on his shoulders. And bringing it right up to date, and these are some clay tobacco pipes, the bowls from clay tobacco pipes, which are a very common find in archaeological sites, starting from the 1600s when tobacco was first introduced to Britain, right up until the early 20th century. And these ones, well, I had to make a selection to go on display because we have hundreds and hundreds of them. So I chose my favourites, of which particularly this chicken-headed one from the late 19th century is one of my favourites. I can't ever decide whether it would just have been a novelty item brought out at Christmas, or whether anyone would try to have seriously smoked with their chicken-headed tobacco pipe. And I think this is the final little animal I'm showing you. And again, we also have a microscope display in the gallery, or a magnifying display, because this little tiny bear is only about 2 centimetres long. It's a Roman item found in York, and it's made of jet, which is a kind of black stone that you often get on the North Yorkshire coast. Again, one of my absolute favourites, partly because it's so tiny, you kind of have to be dedicated to find it in the gallery.
And that's the kind of artifact that our field team might not pick up, but our environmental archaeologists might pick up in the labs when they're looking at
Yeah,
things under microscope. Well, maybe not
absolutely. If you
microscope for
can
this
imagine
one.
it in amongst the mud, you wouldn't. It's not very clear on the photo, but if you can see in between his legs, he's got a hole, and that hole goes all the way through. So again, likely it to have been some kind of pendant or something.
Wonderful.
So just to show you, although we don't have these are in the other gallery, the Sheffield Life and Times gallery, these are some items that have been excavated by commercial units in the past from sites in Sheffield. So these are items from perhaps the later 1800s, the early 1900s. And so glass bottles are quite often come up. So we quite often find Henderson's bottles. We have to be quite selective about which Henderson's bottles we take now. And ceramic is often found. And again, here on this photograph on the left, you can see one that's a mug with a children's rhyme on it. So it kind of adds to that whole picture of what you can find out through records and social history is added to in terms of maybe ordinary people's lives. So that sort of mug might not be special enough to be put in a ceramics collection, but the fact that you found it on a site in Sheffield means that, you know, maybe a child was drinking their milk from it, or you know, you can imagine workmen drinking from other things. In the foreground, that black rectangular item is an ingot, for making. It's a mold for making an ingot, making steel ingots. And a lot of the items that we find relate back to Sheffield's industrial history, and particularly the cutlery industry. There's hardly a site in Sheffield where you don't find those knife scales that I was talking about, or worked bone, or often blanks for knives or files, or that sort of thing. And that all adds up with the paper records that you have. You might have a paper record that there was a site there, a workshop, or a factory, and then it tells you, well, actually, so one site, they found hundreds and hundreds of blanks for tuning forks in the cellar. And I think there had perhaps been one reference in the paper records that there had been a tuning fork manufacturer. Well, here's the evidence that, you know, that there was a tuning fork manufacturer on this site. And so in terms of, I think I mentioned that lots of the sites have been excavated in the past. Well, often sites are revisited for excavation. So these objects here, these pieces of animal bone, are from a site in Bolsterstone in the north of Sheffield, where there was a glass making workshop in the 1700s, and we have the glass making crucibles on display and other items. And then Wessex Archaeology went back in 2008 and re-excavated, perhaps not exactly the same bit of the site, but, you know, different bits of the site, and found, amongst other things, these animal bones, which are the sort of things that wouldn't really have been collected in, say, 19th century or even early 20th century excavations. So that's another reason why it can be worth going back and re-excavating. And I think Jenny had mentioned looking at, you know, butchery marks or whatever. If you look on the left-hand side picture, that piece of bone, it's got some scratches on it that, to my eye, well, you'd certainly merit further investigation as to what had made those scratches. They seem a bit too even to just be random. You know, is that a butchery mark? Is it somebody sharpening their knife? You need an expert to tell, but it means you investigate a bit further.
Thank you for watching our Heritage Talk on Hidden Nature, What's Beneath Your Feet. Keep an eye out for future Heritage Talks across our social media channels.